Hi, everyone. Let me know if you're here. You can drop it in a comment. My name is Paulina Beck, and I'm an enrolled agent. I'm going to give a couple more minutes to let everybody come in before we get started. But today, the main goal is breaking the tax cycle. Can we figure out what's going on with your taxes so that you don't always feel surprised? So today's webinar is going to be about tax planning and how we can actually get you out of just feeling like you're always trapped and just basically the victim of your taxes versus being in charge and in control and leading the way on paying your taxes. So I'll give a couple more minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be responding. And at the end, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take any questions and provide some insight. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So let's get going. So one of the things that I want to start with is today we're sitting on January 8th, and a lot of the questions that I'm getting is like, oh, what can I do about my taxes? And I find that when we get to January, we're kind of just more triaging and basically making the pain more palatable than actually being able to fix things and make things better. But that doesn't mean that we can't start looking ahead at 2026. So what I want to go through with everybody is how do you break the tax cycle? But for us to know how to break the tax cycle, we have to know what the cycle is. And that cycle is what I call the brace for impact cycle. And you're in the cycle when you barely finish your taxes and you already have to start thinking about next year. The best way I can describe that is you're filing extensions, you're like rushing to file your taxes in October. That's your personal taxes. And you're like, man, I only have like 2 months and a half before I already have to start thinking about next year. So if that was you in October, let me tell you, you are right in the middle of the cycle. The good news is you can actually get out of it. So before we get out of it, let's talk about what are the phases. And this is not something permanent. All of this is fixable, doable. You're not asking for the moon. You're not asking for anything out of this world. It's just being able to clearly see what's going on, what actions can we take, and where can we go from here. So the first phase in the cycle, I call it just the avoidance. You avoid it. And this looks a lot like you're making money, but you have no clue what you owe in taxes. So you just, I'll deal with it when the tax bill comes. Or, I'll figure it out. I did last year, whatever. And here's the thing, your taxes are one of the biggest bills you pay. And if you're running a business or have a W-2 that it's a certain size, that is a lot of money to just leave up to chance. So when we're avoiding it, I completely get the feeling and the experience. Don't get me wrong. Who wants to be like, let me look at that number? But what I will offer is that what it does let you do is if we get out of this cycle, we can actually start putting a face, a name, a shape to the boogeyman. Because that's all really is. In the years that I have done this, what I have found is most of the time we're not really just avoiding the number, it's everything and all the feelings that come along with it. So if you knew today, January 8th, what you would potentially owe in 26 and we were to keep up with it throughout the year, wouldn't that make you feel a lot better? It wouldn't really be about the number anymore. It would be more about what can we do about it. But the reality is most accounts are not, that's not how they run things. So we end up with the avoidance and getting out of it. Now, when you're in the cycle, it sounds a lot like I know I should be making quarterly payments, but I don't know. And to be fair, if you've never gone through it, nobody's shown you, that makes sense. I would be in the same phase too. A lot of times it's my accountant will figure it out or they'll tell me what to do. Some will do, some won't. But getting or starting to get out of the cycle actually looks like breaking it. Is I don't want to be blindsided again. So is there anything I can do? You start asking a little bit more questions during the year versus when you have to prepare your taxes. Now, the next part of the cycle is really the guessing. And when I say guessing, I really do mean guessing. People are like, well, I heard on TikTok that I should put 30% away. Or my account just said grab last year's number and divide by 4. And that's how much I should be paying quarterly. Or, well, I heard this, but if I do this expense, I think it will be around that number. It's still highly educated. You're using some information, but there's nothing that you can take to the bank. In other words, you could be right, you could be wrong, but we won't know. And when you're starting to break from it, at least we're using profit and loss, or we're trying to use information to like narrow it down from like a wide band to something more manageable. And then the next part of it is the panic. And I usually face the panic around 2 times. It's around December, closer to December 31st, where it's like, is there anything I can buy? Can I buy a car? Can I buy a computer? And it's very high and a lot of energy and a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And panic makes sense because you're dealing with the fact that, am I going to deal with a giant bill? Or I had a really great year, but I invested that all in the business. Or, my kid went to college, so it wasn't like I was, throwing parties. So with all of it, now we start trying to like make everything a deduction. So anything and everything that sounds like you can buy, you're like, but that's a write-off. And then you get into the Schitt's Creek of it all, of like, but it's a write-off. And then you start having conversations. But what is a write-off? So breaking out of that cycle, or starting to break out of that cycle, is more, okay, I don't want to be scrambling in December anymore. Can I start asking questions right after I file my taxes, like while I'm doing things? What about during Thanksgiving? What about, we can start asking questions a little bit sooner so that we have time to plan. And it also means we have more options. Okay. And now the final part of it is what we talked about in the beginning, which starts the cycle all over again, which is repeating everything all over again. So if you filed an extension, you barely made it through October and you're already having to think about next year. And you're like, I never get a break from my taxes. All I think about is my taxes. That's all. But I'm willing to offer that there's a better option out there. And when you start breaking the cycle, what if you could have most of the year to think about the taxes, or you think about your taxes like at a very set times and it's all figured out? That's what getting out of the cycle looks like. So if you've been here, and I would say most business owners or anyone that's had any major life changes, if you got married, you're like, okay, how do my taxes look now? If we keep avoiding and then hoping to guess around when your taxes are due, panic when the bill comes, and then let the cycle repeat, like that is really stressful. And what I'm going to offer you is that there's a better way to not only not be in the cycle, but to never be in the cycle again. And it doesn't involve buying a plane or doing any crazy things that you've seen on social media. So I call that the North Star method. And what that looks like, it has 3 steps, and it's all about knowing, choosing, and planning. So the first step, it's called no. And I say no because a lot of the times, especially at the end of the year when you're like, oh, should I buy a car? Should I buy more equipment? Should I buy a new laptop? Or you're just thinking about expenses or putting your kid on payroll, whatever it may be. You are choosing or looking at that number in a vacuum. So the best way I can describe it is you're like, okay, well, I could use a new car. I need a new car. My car was, getting old, or, I like new cars. That's my thing. Great. But you have to look at it as, let's just say you buy a $50, $60, $100,000 car. You have to think about it is me spending $100,000 cheaper than the bill I would have? And most of the time, if you don't have a bill, it sounds like a better number because at least it is a number. However, if you and I, or your accountant, you guys were to work together and figure out, if you were, and you ask yourself this exact question, if I filed today, if I had to turn in my taxes today for this year so far, and I wouldn't say you ask yourself that question every day, but let's just say we do that, what would you owe? And I always tell people at the beginning of the year, it is a very educated guess. But as the year's progressing that number gets more and more accurate to the point where you can get down to the penny. So if you were to ask yourself that question in April of this year, preparing for next year's taxes, so 2026 taxes that we have to file in 2027, that would give you 12 months of roughly knowing a number you have to prepare for. So let's assume that number would be $12,847. Some people have a much bigger bill. I worked with clients that have had hundreds of thousands. I've had clients that had a couple $100 or even had a refund. But if you knew that number today, wouldn't it be so much easier to plan? Yes, because the number you're fearing is not the actual number, which again, nobody wants to pay. It's the not knowing. And from knowing the number, we can make choices. Because if you say, okay, well, if I do nothing, if I were to file my taxes today and not take any opportunities, nothing at all, and my bill is $12,847 versus paying cash or financing a car for $100,000, doesn't $12,847 sound a lot cheaper than $100,000? Even if you finance it as crazy as 6 years and you do all these things, you're still better off paying $12,000 because now you don't have another debt you have to deal with. And that's all I'm arriving at is you can make better choices by just knowing. And I would say you can even get a more accurate number by doing what I do with my clients, which is I run another tax return. So when I give my client examples or I give them a number that we're estimating from, I actually use their tax return. So for example, in the second half of 25, I was running a 2024 return. So using the forms and plugging in all their information, like if we were going to file for 2025. And what that would let me see is it took into account all the little minutia, all the little rules so that we could have a real number. And then as the year was progressing, I would say, hey, what changed? Give me your new pay stub. And we would get all that information. And we were able to keep up with that number to the point that when we got the 2025 forms, we were actually able to plug in all the information and we were less than $100. Some of them I was pretty much on the penny from the numbers. So that means this entire time we knew what we were comparing to. So every time we had to make a choice, we were able to do so. And that's fantastic. So I know I talked about a lot about step one, but all it is just asking yourself, if you were to file today, what would you owe the government? Or what refund would you get? And this becomes your baseline. This is the number that we compare everything we're going to consider choosing to. Is it better? Is it worse? Does it align to what you want to do? Does it not? And that number is the number to beat. So we're not guessing anymore. And now we've completely gotten out of the brace for impact cycle and now stepped into actually planning your taxes. Okay. So now let's talk about what does choosing look like? The second step in the North Star method. Choosing looks like picking strategies. And I always tell clients this, before you pick any of these things I have listed in here, what is it that you want to do this year? What are important things that matter to you this year? Are your kids going to college? Do they start a new daycare? Maybe they stop daycare, now they're in school. Now you don't have that payment, so maybe we can put that money in a retirement account. Maybe you're looking to sell your business. Maybe you're looking to buy a house or your second home. Whatever it may be, we need to know what you want to do financially so that we can choose strategies that help you there rather than picking strategies and then you kind of have to make your life fit into it. So an example of this that I see often on social media is hire your spouse or hire your kids. Those are valid strategies. There's nothing wrong with them, but they don't always make sense for everybody. What happens if your kid already has a job? What happens if your spouse is already working or has no business being involved in your business or so many other things? That strategy doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense in your real life. So that's what we want to work on is make sure that we pick things and choose things that actually line up to your life. So whether it be prepaying some expenses or buying that truck that you needed for deliveries, but you weren't sure what's the best way to do it. At least now we can see, okay, you were already going to do it. So it already makes sense that the things we have to do to make sure that these things are actually done properly, recorded properly, documented properly. So if in the rare chance you were ever to get audited, you could actually support it, makes sense, because if you're already going to do it, why not? So choosing is all about picking the things that make sense in your life and then comparing it to that baseline number. So that looks like in reality something like this, which is called the math never lies. And I say smart strategy versus wrong strategy because they both might cost you the same amount of money up front, but the outcomes might be completely different. And a lot of the times it's not so much on the tax savings, but on the amount of cash it costs you. A good one of this is, for example, let's just say you're buying equipment. Buying equipment is not necessarily bad if that's in the business that you're in. If you have a flooring company and you need to deliver for installations, or if you have a garage door company and you need the vans to go to your clients and install, maybe buying a new van makes sense because that's what your employees are going to use. That means now you can generate more revenue. However, if it's going to cost you, and most vans wouldn't cost you this, but let's just say it's going to cost you $25,000 to do, and maybe you're leasing it. Let's just say you leased it instead of bought it. It's only going to save you so much money. But if you needed to put money in retirement because you were going to retire in 2 years and that's what you're looking to do, maybe the better position is to put money in the retirement account. One strategy is not better than the other. They both work. It's just, do they align to what you want to do and do they make sense? Because a lot of the times it all goes back to you and what makes sense to you. A lot of this also comes back to two analogies that I use. One is going to the doctor and saying, oh, my friend's taking this medication. And you're like, well, we don't know what your friend has. We don't know what, why they made that choice versus another. So everything has to be tailored to you. And another thing, when it comes to choosing what you want to do financially during the year, what I tell people is like, only you know that. Your accountant, maybe your financial advisor can have some say in it, but only you know that information. And the best way to look at it is, I can tell you what it's like for me to be married, but I can't tell you what it's like for you to be married. And that's the piece that people tend to forget, is that it all comes back to you and what makes sense for you and your family and your business. So if you remember to choose your number and figure out what happens if you were to file today, then we can choose our strategies. And then look at the math, make sure it doesn't lie and actually makes sense in your real world, and you're saving money and not just giving more money to the government because it makes you feel good. Okay, now the final plan, the final step is planning. And that looks like, we already know the number we're comparing it to. We've chosen strategies that make it where you are in better shape. And now we start planning. What means is, okay, so you said you wanted to put your son or your daughter on payroll. Fantastic. What job are they going to do? Do we need to sign them up for payroll? Okay. We need to set up the accounts. What roles are they going to have? How many hours? Like all those little logistics. That's what the planning is for, to make sure we do things right. Because the main thing when it comes to your taxes is, this is not a skeleton you want in your closet. Every time you do your taxes, you want to make sure the file is fully closed. And then if anybody were to come and ask you questions, you would have all the proper documents, everything set up so that you could provide it over and it doesn't become a 6-month project. And that's what a lot of people miss, is that they're like, oh, I can put my kid on payroll. I'm like, okay, great. What did you do? Did you set up the proper payroll accounts? Did you pay them the right way? Did you move the money the right way? Because if you didn't, then that whole tax savings could be out the window because we don't have the right documents. And if the IRS or the state were to come in and audit you randomly, or because of there's something in the return, now that savings became a giant bill. So planning is just as important as the other two steps. And it looks like having key points. So for example, in November, I do this throughout the year, but I'm just going to give like at the end of the year, just so you have a frame of reference. In November, we're like keeping up with the bill and saying, okay, now we only have like 2 months left in the year. The odds are, unless you're in certain industries and you already know that that's going to happen, your year is pretty much set. So if it's already set, now we just got to make sure we wrap it up so that we know exactly what payments we need to make, what needs to happen. And then we make sure that all the strategies we're looking at make sense. In December, this is where you make the final checks if you're making the final little bits of contributions to retirement accounts. You write all the depreciation, get all the paperwork. And then my case, I start preparing 25 returns. So usually at the beginning of the second week of December, I'm already drafting returns for my clients. And that lets me be able to let them know before the year even ends, hey, I ran all the numbers that we have already talked about, everything we've been checking throughout the year, and this is what the final number is. And weeks like this week, which is our first week back from the holidays, today I wrote an email to the client that said, hey, please make sure you already finished the last payment that we talked about. They confirmed it. Here are the remaining documents I need. Let's meet on the 10th to get all the documents together for you to confirm the return and to file. And this client could be done filing by the end of January. And they run a more than six-figure business, and it's all done because we've been planning throughout the year. So right now, all we do January through April, if we need to, or further into the extensions, is just execute, 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 execute. Okay, so past the seeing, choosing, and planning, all you have to know is you don't need a perfect year. You just need a clear plan. So know, choose, plan. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, put it in the comments or send me a DM. More than happy to help. You don't have to be stuck with just reacting to the system. You can actually have better options, and I'm here to help. So I'll be hosting webinars about twice a month, talking about different topics that I find people need to know. And if you'd like to save money on taxes, like to have a different experience and really break out of the cycle, just reach out. More than happy to help. Hope everybody has a lovely Thursday, and we'll be in touch soon.